And my name is Jessica Patton, and I'm a teacher at a Catholic school, elementary school, and I've been there for 8 years now. And prior to teaching at a Catholic school, I taught in an educational clinic for students with learning disabilities, whether they were diagnosed or undiagnosed, or behavioral disabilities, or sometimes just kids that were a little hard, I guess maybe hard on their luck. They, through no fault of their own, they were in a situation where education wasn't accessible for them. And I think the reason that I became a teacher is I could really identify with a lot of these kids, and the way that I grew up in school always being my safe place, and always knowing that no matter what, I could count on a teacher to be there for me. I was a great student, which made that a lot easier for the teachers to be there for me. But I quickly discovered that the better I was at being a student, the more love I felt from my teachers. And so it just became my safe haven. And at times when things were a little rougher at home, or just life wasn't really agreeing with me at that point, I could always count on going to school, where I'd see my friends and I'd see my teachers and I'd feel valued by people. It's not necessarily the way my path took me, but it did eventually end me up in the classroom. So when I went to school, I started out in teacher education, and then I left that to marry the love of my life. And but then my family realized I wasn't quite happy in the career that I had chosen at that time, and so they kept sending me these articles to be a teacher, to be a teacher, to be a teacher. And that's how I ended up at my former employer, the educational clinic. And then when I had children and they were going to school, I thought, oh wow, I've always wanted to be on a similar schedule to them. I've always, how can I impact more students? How can I be part of a greater educational community? And it just so happened that when my daughter went to kindergarten, she had a great kindergarten year, and then her first grade teacher left a couple of days before the school year began, and I ended up at my current position as a Catholic school educator. And through that experience, I have taught first grade, I've taught second grade, I've taught third through fifth grade in a special education program, and I've taught fourth grade. And through all of that experience, regardless of grade level that I was teaching, the one common thread was and is the faith, and that no matter what grade level or what need level I was teaching, I could always rely on the message that Jesus is love and Jesus loves us, and we are made in God's image, and God doesn't make mistakes. And so just that constant running through my mind so that I could share that same love with the students. I don't think that was always the case, and it wasn't until I was a Catholic school teacher that my faith really began to grow, probably partly because it was an obligation, that now I was not just responsible for knowing things, I had to figure out a way to communicate it to my students. So that's when I think, as far as my faith is concerned, it really took off. I felt this greater need to know more, so that when my students had a question, I could be there for them to answer that question. And I love to accumulate knowledge anyway. And so it just really, I was able to marry my true conviction in my heart with the faith, to now I was building this great academic knowledge of the faith. And so it just grew even more. I would say probably one of the greatest years of growth was teaching second grade, when it was a sacramental year. So I was teaching all of the lessons on reconciliation, and all of the lessons on communion and the importance of the Eucharist as the body and blood of Christ, and what exactly that meant. And that was another big moment for me, when it's easy, as kind of this person who's immersed in the world, we just can't escape whatever lessons the world is trying to teach us. It can become really easy to forget the truth of faith, that it is the body and blood of Christ, that reconciliation is, as Bishop Robert Barron likes to say, meeting eyelash to eyelash with God and confessing those sins. And so that was a big year of growth for me as far as my faith is concerned. And then as I continued teaching and teaching older grades and the questions changed, they got almost simpler but more complex. So again, I felt this great need to increase my knowledge, and the fourth grade was another big year, increase my knowledge of the saints. At our school, we do a lot with the saints in our fourth grade year, and it was during that time period and during teaching during the last 3 years, and especially the years of COVID and then coming back from COVID, have been particularly difficult. And my partner teacher and I were kind of feeling a lull or a dip in I won't say it was a dip in our faith. It was kind of a dip in being able to see the beauty of our faith as we looked around us. And that's when, we were searching for something. We knew it was our responsibility. We knew it was our responsibility in our minds, and we felt it was our responsibility in our hearts, that we had to change something about what we were doing, because we were seeing materialism and commercialism and just really the times when kids were on their phones all the time, and when technology became a god to a lot of people. We knew that we had to bring it back to basics and bring it back to reality. And that's what for us did the trick was building virtue back to basics. Who did God design us to be? He designed us to be virtuous people if we only choose to cooperate with his master plan, which the world is constantly trying to tear us away from. So we discovered, we had been introduced to the program Virtue Equals Strength, and we were getting the emails, and we were reading them, and we're like, okay, this looks good, but how are we going to incorporate it into our classrooms? And then we really just had that moment, like, we've got to do this. We're all in at this point. What is there to lose in teaching virtue? I mean, when you think about it, yeah, we're losing maybe whatever vocabulary word our religion textbook told us that we needed to teach that week, or whatever it might be. And it was kind of at that point that we also thought to ourselves, well, okay, so if we're all in on this virtue equals strength thing, how do we blend this? How do we blend it with our current curriculum, or what do we do to make this stand out? Because this is what they really need. Their hearts really need this. And so we had come to the realization that vocabulary is wonderful, but it's not teaching our kids how to be good Christians, good Catholics, to live in the footsteps of Jesus. And so we really went all in on virtue equals strength, and that became our vocabulary. Those became our daily lessons. And the conversations that we've had with students have been phenomenal conversations about real life virtue for them. And it's grown, when we talk about faith growth, it's definitely grown our students. Our students love that it's different than what they experience in other grade levels. They love that it meets them where they are. It meets them with their current issues. And there's really no issue that doesn't involve a virtue conversation, that doesn't involve you just, got in an argument on the playground. Were you practicing temperance? Were you practicing prudence? Were you being magnanimous? Were you assuming the best of the other person when you had this interaction? And how can we create this human relationship that is centered around our faith, what we know to be true, what we know to be valuable for us? And the bonus is that as I'm through the Virtual Growth Strength program, as my partner teacher and I are kind of using the vocabulary, we're using the slides, we're bringing up the saints, and we're reflecting on the quotations, and we're praying every single day. And when we're doing that intentionally with our students, there's the growth for us too. There's the relationship, the connection that happens there. I can just think so many times when we're talking about a particular virtue, whether it's, again, prudence, temperance, whether it's love of neighbor, whatever it might be, the reality is that I was a fourth grader once, I was a second grader once, I struggled with the same things that they struggled with. And the reality is I still have those struggles. They just look different as an adult. And so we can have that relationship building moment all centered around a virtue. And I just can't imagine not teaching virtue, not building the core. It's like everything else we do in our lives. If we've got to have that strong foundation, that solid core to build everything else around. And if it's not there, it's everything else eventually just falls apart. So that's, not necessarily why I became a teacher. I didn't think to myself when I became a teacher, oh, I can't wait to teach virtue to students. Oh, I can't wait to get in that classroom and, teach them the Beatitudes and teach them the 10 Commandments. I know that was never consciously part of my plan. But what I did know is that I wanted to make an impact on a child's life. And I wanted to make them feel safe. I wanted to make them feel heard, loved, respected. I wanted to create a relationship that they could look back on, and whether they remembered my name or not, they could know, they would have good feelings about that particular year. And I guess ultimately what I didn't know that I needed would be virtue, faith, love, our Blessed Mother, the guidance of her Son and God, and that's what's formed the core of everything that I do in the classroom, everything that I teach about virtue, all the praying that we do, and I pray that it forms the core of my students, so when they continue on, that they have a start, a seed planted, that maybe, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, they'll be sitting in front of this camera talking about virtue and about how important it is to them.